The whole room, I was too poor to hire a lawyer, and the worst part was that everyone agreed with her. That was the moment I decided the woman who tried to erase me would be the one who disappeared instead. My name is Dean, and this is how I walked into a Fulton County courtroom with nothing but a legal pad and walked out having taken down a corporate empire. I was 33, representing myself in my own divorce trial, because my wife Renata had frozen every account, canceled every card, and made sure no attorney in Atlanta could touch me. Renata was not just wealthy, she was the CEO of Coal Freight Systems, a logistics empire with her name on glass towers across Midtown. Her table looked like a war room, paralegals, color-coded binders, and her attorney Preston Vale, a man known less for winning cases than for leaving opponents with nothing left to stand on. When I walked in wearing a suit that no longer fit and carrying a beat-up briefcase, Renata laughed loud enough for the gallery to hear and announced I was too poor to hire a lawyer. The judge, a stern old veteran named Elias Thorne, warned me I would be held to the same standard as any attorney if I proceeded alone. I said I understood. Preston opened by painting Renata as the self-made genius and me as a man who contributed nothing beyond the domestic sphere, then quietly slipped in that I had a documented history of emotional instability, planting the seed early that nothing I said could be trusted. Renata layered on the performance, soft voice, wounded eyes, insisting she only wanted to move forward and had offered me a settlement I foolishly refused. What none of them knew was that Renata had made one careless mistake in a life built entirely on control. She had linked all our home devices to one shared family server for convenience. Backups, documents, financial records, everything synced quietly to a hard drive sitting in our own basement. When it was my turn, I did not talk about love or sacrifice. I gave the court paper. I told the judge that Renata financial disclosures were incomplete and named a hidden trust worth roughly $47 million that appeared nowhere in her filings. The room went dead silent. Preston shot up, screaming speculation, but I handed the bailiff a wire transfer confirmation, one clean document, enough to prove I was not guessing. Judge Thorne studied the page and his tone changed instantly, ordering Preston to respond. Renata sat frozen, her knuckles white against her binder. Finally understanding that the man she mocked had somehow gotten inside the walls she thought were sealed. Preston tried to rebuild credibility by calling the company's CFO, Marcus Boyd, a longtime family friend who swore under oath the books were clean and there was no hidden trust. On cross-examination, I reminded Marcus, gently but methodically, of a company retreat where he had drunkenly handed me his laptop password because he trusted me, and I asked him directly whether the company internal accounting software maintained two separate sets of records. He tried to dodge, but the judge ordered him to answer, and he finally admitted the software could generate different reporting views, one for auditors and one for leadership. I asked him plainly if that meant two books, and I watched panic cross his face. Then I introduced a filing showing a shell company called Orion Ridge Consulting, registered to Renata-own assistant, and asked Marcus who authorized the payments running through it. He nearly said Renata told me before catching himself, but the sentence had already started, and the whole courtroom heard it. Preston pivoted to the only weapon he had left, my psychiatric history. He produced a sworn statement from my former doctor, Naomi Reyes, describing me as suffering from paranoid ideation after the loss of our child, suggesting I could not be trusted to interpret financial documents or explain how I obtained them. Renata played the grieving, frightened wife perfectly, saying she was scared I was spiraling again. On the stand, I did not flinch. I explained honestly that I had sought treatment for depression and insomnia after our miscarriage, and that during that time I had started quietly recording conversations, not out of paranoia, but because I already sensed my own word would never be enough in a room full of money. Preston tried to twist every answer, but I stayed calm, and when I mentioned the recordings, I saw Renata's knuckles go white again. Judge Thorne allowed a portion to be played after I laid proper foundation. What came out of the speakers was not the soft, wounded voice Renata performed for the court. It was her real voice, cold and amused, telling me flatly that money moves and I would never get near it, and that if I tried, she would have Dr. Reyes write whatever diagnosis she needed. Because people like me do not win court fights, they get declared incompetent. The room went absolutely silent. Judge Thorne removed his glasses, cleaned them slowly, and asked Preston directly whether his client had just admitted to purchasing a false medical diagnosis. Renata snapped that it was taken out of context and was immediately warned by the judge to stay silent. I then called Dr. Reyes herself, and under oath, trembling, she admitted her statement about my mental state was not accurate, that I had never been paranoid or delusional, and that she had been pressured into using specific language after a personal debt of hers was quietly handled. The courtroom exhaled all at once. Judge Thorne told Renata plainly that this was no longer ordinary divorce proceedings, but allegations of concealed assets, coercion, and medical interference. From there, I laid out the math that mattered most. Comparing employee payroll deductions meant for retirement accounts against what was actually deposited, month after month showing a gap, with matching transfers routed to an offshore account within 24 hours of each missing deposit. An internal auditor who had once flagged the discrepancy had conveniently lost his job soon after. Renata finally cracked completely, shouting that I had hacked her systems and stolen everything. And in her fury, she accidentally confirmed exactly how I had access, blurting out details about the very device sync she had insisted on years earlier for convenience. Judge Thorne noted for the record that she had just corroborated my access herself. I asked for temporary control over the voting interests in the marital estate, not out of greed, but as a safeguard for thousands of employees whose retirement money was disappearing. Then I placed my final piece of evidence on the table, a flight booking out of Atlanta made during the recess the day before, time-stamped and tied directly to her synced accounts. Renata lunged to her feet, screaming that it was fabricated, then made the fatal mistake of arguing details only someone with real access would know, confirming the booking was real. Judge Thorne ordered her passport surrendered immediately and froze key assets pending a receiver. Before anyone could process it, the courtroom doors opened and federal agents walked in with a warrant, arresting Renata on the spot for securities fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and tampering with medical records to manipulate a legal proceeding. She did not fight. She did not speak. She simply stared straight ahead as they led her out in handcuffs. The empire she built on control collapsing in the same room where she once laughed at a man with nothing but a yellow legal pad. In the weeks that followed, I stepped into emergency oversight of the company just long enough to stop the bleeding, prioritizing the restoration of every stolen retirement dollar and cooperating fully with federal investigators. Late one night in what used to be her office, I found a hidden safe containing years of notes, including an old file revealing she had targeted me from the very beginning for family land near the river that had been in my name long before we ever met. It did not make me angry anymore. It just made everything finally make sense. Months later, once the company stabilized under court-appointed oversight and every stolen pension dollar had been repaid, I drove out to that same stretch of family land and left a copy of the court order there. Quiet proof that something taken through lies had finally been protected. On the first day of that trial, an entire room laughed at me because I looked poor and alone. They mistook silence for weakness. What they never understood was that silence, when it finally has somewhere to go, is the most dangerous thing in the room. If Dean's story kept you hooked until the very last word, make sure you hit subscribe. Because the Revenge Tales brings you a brand new story just like this one every single week. And trust me, the next one hits even harder.